Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan Ernest Pierce. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. We're going to go to, there's a good deal of different topics we're going to deal with today. We're going to dip into a thread by a chap called Fabian Hoffman, John Ridge, someone I'm hoping to interview at some point, or have a chat with at some point on this channel. He's a bit of an expert in all things munitions and whatnot. It says it's a concise foundation for the arguments that NATO must rapidly pivot from a tripwire position to one capable of denying Russia the ability to seize and occupy a meaningful amount of NATO territory for a prolonged period of time. This is just someone's opinion as to why. Okay, well, he explains it here in this thread. I'll explain why we are much closer to war with Russia than most people realize, and why our time window for rearmament is shorter than many believe. In my opinion, we have at best 2 to 3 years to re-establish deterrence vis-a-vis Russia, and here's why. Now, there's also a thread that looks at some of the points made, and it's not quite a counter, but I'll hopefully deal with that as well. Which is, he says it's a provocative thread and he has a response to it, just maybe clarifications and whatnot. But we'll go through and see what we can make of this. So, first of all, Fabian Hoffman, who is he? He is doctoral research fellow at Nuclear Oslo, University of Oslo, Defense Policy, Missile Technology, Nuclear Strategy, etc., etc. Okay, so one common mistake in analysing the threat posed by Russia is falling into the trap of mirror imaging. This means assuming that Russia views a potential conflict with us in the same way we view a potential conflict with them. Nothing could be further from the truth. There's an asymmetry into the approaches each entity has towards the other. Okay, it's not mirror image. Actually, we see Russia very differently to how they see themselves and to how they see us, and vice versa. In addition, it is important to be cautious about extrapolating too many lessons from Ukraine and assuming that the war with Russia would unfold in a similar manner, albeit on a larger scale. In reality, a war between NATO and Russia would likely take on a very different form altogether. I mean, goodness me. Absolutely. The war in Ukraine is very one-dimensional. By that, I mean, there's really not a great deal of Air Force usage. Yes, there is some. Russians have a fairly large air force, but they're not committing them to the front line particularly very much because the airspace is still really contested. Likewise, the Russian Navy is actually fairly extensive and half decent, and they are, their submarines are very capable, but they are unable to be brought to bear really in this conflict. And so if NATO was to go to war with Russia, there are many aspects of warfare that we're not really seeing in the war in Ukraine. That said, I mean, my opinions is that NATO would make very quick. I think there's just a huge asymmetry between the capability of NATO and the capacity of NATO now, and what the Russians have, particularly in terms of ground forces. Russians have been massively attrited. And I think, personally, in a ground war, Poland could beat Russia now quite convincingly. So if it came to the combined forces of NATO against Russia, I think it would be very, very one-sided. The only question is over nuclear, obviously. If you were to just take out nuclear and say that's not going to happen, then the war would be over relatively quickly. So that's my opinion. Right, Russia does not plan for the type of large-scale conventional war with NATO that we are currently seeing in Ukraine, and for which we are primarily preparing. Already, before taking substantial losses on the Ukrainian battlefield, Russia knew that it would be inferior in such a scenario. Russian thinking on a war with NATO revolves around the concept of escalation control and escalation management. So this is where nuclear becomes like the central component. Russia's primary objective in a war with NATO is to effectively manage escalation and bring the war to an early end on terms that are favourable to Russia. If you want to see more about this, check out Perun's video on escalation. It's very good. Terminating hostilities early is necessary, given that Russia must secure a victorious outcome before NATO's conventional superiority comes to bear, most notably that of the United States. Two key concepts play a crucial role: de-escalation strikes and aggressive sanctuarization. Rather than comprehensively defeating NATO in a prolonged ground war, similar to what we see in Ukraine, Russian doctrine suggests that Russia would attempt to coerce NATO into submission by signaling the ability to inflict progressively greater amounts of damage. This would entail, in particular, long-range strikes against critical civilian infrastructure across European NATO countries early on. The message to NATO governments: don't come to the support of your Eastern European allies unless you want to see your population suffer. Simultaneously, Russia would extend its nuclear umbrella over any NATO territory it managed to capture in an initial assault. This sends a second message: any endeavour to retake that territory, particularly by external NATO forces, USA, will result in nuclear escalation. Of course, the problem here is that the Russians would just be completely unable to advance. They don't have the troops to conduct a meaningful offensive in Ukraine. Like, they're desperately getting troops from Nepal, from Cape Verde, from Mali. They're nicking people from prisons, right? They don't have the troops. They would, of course, have a massive national mobilization. Of course, they would. They wouldn't be trained troops, and sending them into Europe would just be cannon fodder. So yes, this might be what their plan, but they'd be completely unable to do this. This sends a second message: any endeavour to retake the territory, particularly by external NATO forces, will result in nuclear escalation. The psychological fear of escalation, which may ultimately result in unacceptable damage, is supposed to open the door for negotiations about the future of NATO and the security architecture in Europe, of course, on Russia's terms. This type of warfighting scenario is not a contest of forces, but primarily a risk-taking competition. The question becomes: who will be the first to back down when confronted with the prospect of large-scale war, including potential exchanges of strategic nuclear warheads? I mean, a massive game of international chicken. As Cold War historians know, the balance of military power is not deterministic of outcomes of risk-taking competitions. Instead, they are often determined by the balance of resolve, i.e., the relative willingness to remain steadfast even as risks are increasing. Now, this is important because Russia, especially when you've got a dictator in charge and you are essentially connected to the outcome of these sort of things, a dictatorial regime will be able to, I think, stay longer on that road in a game of chicken. Go back to, what is it in Footloose? Is it combine harvesters, tractors are driving against each other? That game of chicken, right? Who stays on the road the longest? Well, I think a dictator like Putin will have the ability to stay on the longest. It's basically a game of chicken in terms of who are you looking out for? Russia's like, Putin would just be looking out for himself, like one human being, with no care in the world for the rest of his population, and he's connected existentially to the outcome of that nation. And I guess everyone's existence is connected in some way to a nuclear game of chicken. But yeah, I get this intuition that he would be able, in principle, to stay on that road longer. This is why Russia pursues this type of strategy. Russia does not need to match NATO's conventional power. As long as NATO gives in first amid mounting psychological pressure due to a lack of resolve, Russia can walk away with a victory. I think it's a really interesting dynamic there. Here's the thing. The ongoing war in Ukraine is teaching Russia a crucial lesson: that the West lacks resolve. Domestic disunity and endless discussions about escalation only reinforce Russia's belief that NATO will back down when push comes to shove. And again, this goes back to dictatorship versus democracy. But what you've got happening in the US, unfortunately, in this particular kind of very focused area, is that there's an impasse in Congress due to democracy, right? And unfortunately, you've got a two-party system in the US, which is it's the narrowest form of democracy. And I'm not going to sidetrack this with talk about first past the post electoral systems being problematic, but you don't really have a representative democracy. Well, you do, but it's a very poor form of representative democracy, rather like in the UK as well. And as a result, it's become hyper partisan. And interestingly, activity from Russia has aided that in amplifying divisive messaging. that is pulling the US apart like this, and you had two kind of extreme ends. Well, not really extreme. Like, I do think there's movement towards the extremities, but actually, I don't think you have really a very strong left wing in the United States. I know Republicans will attack Democrats as being socialist and communist and all this, but actually, if you look at the Democrats compared to the UK, for example, like historically, the Democrats have sat where our conservatives have historically sit. Our conservatives have started moving to the right, interestingly, but there isn't really a very big established left wing in the US. You started to get like a progressive caucus amongst the Democrats, with some of these Justice Democrats and whatnot, and there is a slight move towards more of a social democratic left wing. But historically, it's not been the case, and yet there's this appearance that it's this really divided left and right wing. It's actually a really divided, very much right wing and centrist, I would argue, positioning there. But anyway, that's kind of by the by. The democracy that you have there, which is very partisan, means that it's almost impossible to get anything passed, any big idea passed. Aid to Ukraine, I don't know, climate change initiatives, border stuff. It's just all of these are like, right, that is our thing, or that is their thing. There's no agreement. It's just like that, and as a result, nothing gets done. With Putin, it's like, I make the rules, guys. What I say goes. And if we're going to mobilize, we're going to mobilize. And if we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And it's much easier. So, when we commit to war, I can invade Ukraine, and I can mobilize a load of people, and you guys can have a big argument in Congress about whether you're going to get aid to Ukraine. And all while you're having that big argument, no aid goes to Ukraine, I'm going to try and kill more Ukrainians. That's the approach there. So they're very, very different political structures, mean that when you're playing this international game of nuclear chicken, you have very different approaches. So this means that Russia does not have to wait until its conventional power is reconstituted. Scenarios where we have 5 to 10 years to rearm following the end of the war are way too optimistic, in my opinion. In other words, that this war would have completely decimated the Russian ground force capability. But in international wars with NATO, that actually makes very little difference because it's just about nuclear chicken. I think that's what this is saying here. I am with the Eastern European states that we have at best 2 to 3 years from today to re-establish a credible deterrence posture vis-a-vis Russia. Otherwise, we run the grave risk that Russia is going to challenge us sooner rather than later. NATO must credibly deny Russia the ability to seize any substantial part of NATO territory or to threaten strikes against NATO critical infrastructure. This is needed to escape the coercive conundrum that aggressive sanctuarization and de-escalation strikes pose. We must also have a serious discussion not only about how to deter a war with Russia, but also about how to fight one as we prepare to retaliate against Russian critical civilian infrastructure in case Russia strikes ours first. How do we react to Russian nuclear first use? Our lack of preparedness, both in the physical space but also in terms of our cognitive ability to think through these scenarios, is encouraging Russia. Since 2014, Russian intellectuals have debated extensively and publicly how to win a war against NATO. Where is our debate? This is fascinating. So what we see on Russian television, there's propagandists on state television, they are throwing out these nuts ideas all the time. They're talking about genocide of Ukraine. They're talking about, well, what will happen if we use nuclear weapons? It's stuff that you never see on Western television shows. You never have on, I don't know, Newsnight on the BBC, like Katie Walker or whatever, it's just saying, well, I think we should strike Moscow first in a nuclear attack, and throwing out these bonkers things, and then people agreeing or disagreeing, well, having genuine discussions about these incredibly incredibly, I guess, meaningful events. Huge, big ideas, big events like a nuclear war. We don't discuss that because that's kind of off limits. But Russians are happily doing that, and so they're kind of working through their approach to doing nuclear chicken in a way that the West and NATO isn't in a public consciousness. Sorry. What we need, he finishes, especially in Europe, is whole of society effort to get our affairs in order. There's no denying that this will come with a significant cost, but I fail to see any other viable option, considering worst case scenarios, as we should. Time has already run out. That's his approach. Jeffrey Michaels says, a provocative thread. Here is my response. So, I agree in principle more thinking on the topic is needed. Conceptually flawed scenarios as a basis for policy tends to lead to flawed policy. Also agree that there is an overemphasis on Ukraine war as a baseline for thinking about a NATO-Russia war. Okay, so in other words, this is a problem. We shouldn't look at what's going on in Ukraine and then extrapolate that to what would happen between NATO and Russia, because, as I mentioned, yet in an attempt to avoid one type of mirror imaging, it is crucial to avoid other types. For example, there is a NATO mirror imaging with respect to the sort of war it is gearing up to fight, and assuming Russia will fight it that way. There is also a more basic mirror imaging problem with respect to assumptions about a clear ends, ways, means chain, i.e. Russia has objective X, and to achieve it they will use Y means in Z way. So much hinges, therefore, on a presumed objective. Get this wrong, and assumptions about ways and means become irrelevant. In other words, I mean, this is the same with morality and philosophy. Philosophy and morality is like, we can talk about what we do, morally speaking, on a day-to-day basis, but it's kind of like meaningless if you don't have the goal. But goal, so that's why I always talk about when I discuss morality, goal-orientated morality. You set your goal, like what kind of world do we want, and then you set out how we should live going forward, or what we should do in our world, and what politics we need, what policies we need, and how we interact with each other will be defined by what sort of world we want to live in, or what sort of world we want to move to, but also what kind of world we want to live in now in moving towards that end goal, right? That's the same with exactly this, which is we need to understand what Russia would want in order to understand what they would use and the ways that they would use it in, etc., etc. But so much hinges, therefore, on the presumed objective. If you get that wrong, like all of your planning goes out the window. So the thread discusses various Russian ways and means, effective escalation management to end a war on Russia's terms, seizure of substantial NATO territory, ability to threaten strikes against critical infrastructure, prospect of nuclear escalation, etc. Unfortunately, there's no discussion of what a victorious outcome would be for Russia, nor why the ways means would be appropriate. I love this. I've never read this thread before, right? I just knew it would be a decent thread. I literally have never read this. And my bringing in there of moral philosophy is exactly on point. Exactly on point of what this guy is saying. Like, if you don't discuss the outcomes, I was going to have Tippling Philosopher. ATP comes from Atypical Philosopher, which is where we used to meet once a month or once every couple of months down a pub to discuss a topic. Whenever we discuss things like what you should do in any situation, or politics, which is what you should do on a national level, it is morality. It is kind of your moral obligations, should and ought. It's a moral discussion. As soon as you're having morality, in my opinion, it's about goal-orientated morality. In other words, you can't really have these discussions until you set out the goal. I'm going back to that same point again. But the problem is setting out the goal is really difficult because you're actually saying, what kind of world do we want to live in? That's a massive thing. Like, imagine sitting down, right, and going, right, before I go down a pub on Thursday to discuss this kind of idea of philosophy with my mates, I need to set out everything about the world and how it should be. You can't think of a bigger thing to do. So our brains aren't very good at doing that. But essentially, that's what we need to do. And it's the same for like politics. When we talk about this is a geopolitical channel, we all have our disagreements. But part of that is because none of us have really set out where we want. We'll argue about the southern border and about funding for this and education and what healthcare should look like. And should it be single payer healthcare, universal healthcare, or should it be insurance based? Like, all of that depends on what kind of world you want. What does the world look like? And none of us do that because it's too difficult to do that. So we argue down here in like the mid levels, sometimes at the base levels, at the individual levels, but we've got no idea where we're going, and therefore it's all kind of like it's castle in the air, really. But or like reverse, instead of there's no foundation, actually there's no end point. It's like driving blindly on a motorway to a destination that you don't know and thinking that's the best way to get there. I don't even know if the car's the best way to get there because I have no idea where I'm going. If I'm trying to get into space, then the car's not going to. You know what I mean? So like we argue about all these mid-level things, but none of us has really set out exactly what we want the world to look like. And once you set that out, then politics and morality then falls into place. Anyway, unfortunately, we have no discussion of what a victorious outcome would be for Russia. So we don't know where they're going. Like, it's kind of not really very useful to talk about the ways and means, about how they're going to go about doing what they're doing if we don't know where they're going. So what is their victory? And this is what I talk about in terms of, I love it because these videos are just what's in my head, right? And I don't prepare them. Like I put stuff up there, but I know I'm going to talk about them. And then stuff comes out of my mouth, right? And this is stuff coming out of my mouth. You know, I've talked for a long time about how Putin failed at the beginning of the war, and as soon as he couldn't take Kiev and couldn't switch that government, it turned from an SMO, special military operation, into a war. But then he didn't have a plan B. I can show you my article that I keep referring to that I wrote in March in 2022, and it's still exactly on point, which is that we don't really know what his aims are in Ukraine still. Like, what is he doing? What does victory look like for Russia? And at the moment, well, it's very difficult to try and then fight against Russia if we don't know really what they're trying to achieve. So these claims that keep coming out that Russia's doing this maximalist thing, right? So they want the whole of Ukraine. They're never going to do that. They can't do that. So that can't be their objective. It might be some kind of ideological thing or something you might communicate on TV or whatever. But in reality, surely he realizes you can't do that. But what is his win? He must, surely, he can't just be fumbling his way through this war without any sense of what he tangibly wants to achieve. Like, realistically, sit down with Shoigu and Gerasimov and say, right, we need this. Like something like Transnistria. But if it is that, they don't seem to be doing the things at the moment, putting things in place to achieve that. What are they doing? Is their goal literally just string this out until America get pissed off? And is that the actual goal? In which case, you can faff around. You can attack in Avdiivka, and you can attack in. Like, is Avdiivka just about getting something on the books before his election, so people can go yip de doo? Like, what? And this makes it really difficult to create counter strategies. Like, you know, the US saying, right, you need a strategy for us to give you weapons. Says to Zelensky, and Zelensky says, well, you need to give us weapons so I can develop a strategy. I can't develop a strategy if I don't know what I've got. So the ways and means go often together with your end goal, and sometimes like my end goal could be like getting to the moon, but like designing a vehicle to fly to the moon, right? That's my goal, but I wouldn't have that goal if I was stuck on a desert island with nothing but a bit of water and a bit of food. Right, so I'm never going to create a goal of designing and building a vehicle to get to the moon if I'm stuck on a desert island. So in other words, my goals also need to take into account my ways and means. Like, I shouldn't be setting a goal that's basically physically impossible for me to do. Then go back to your man Putin. Like, the goal also needs to take into account the ways and means. So what is your state of the military? What is your state at the moment with equipment and mobilization, and that needs to take into account your goals. So yes, on the one hand, you need to set out your goals in order to get your ways and means, but on the other hand, it needs to be it's a coextensive thing whereby you are also looking at your ways and means and going, well, actually, what can my goal be given this situation I'm in? It goes both ways, I guess, to a degree there. Anyway, I'm just going off on one, but like all these ideas, I think it's so interesting to think that we are 2 years into this war, and I am still wondering what the freaking goal is of Putin. Wow. Anyway, apart from clarifying Russian objectives, I'll go back one. Unfortunately, there is no discussion of what victorious outcome would be for Russia, nor why the ways and means would be appropriate. If the goal is to coerce NATO into submission, then what demands are they submitting to? Apart from clarifying Russian objectives, looming over the discussion is a fundamental question that needs to be raised. What is holding Russia back? What is deterring them? Might they simply lack a worthwhile objective? Again, this goes to exactly what I've just been talking about. Like, I wonder whether he just doesn't have a worthwhile objective in place. He's got these great ideas, like flying to the moon. Yeah, I'd love to fly to the moon. Yeah, but you're on a desert island, mate, and you've got nothing but a couple of sticks and a bit of rock to throw together, so you ain't going to the moon. Like, he might say, I want to denazify Ukraine, I want to protect the Donbass, and I want to, effectively, in doing that, I want to take control of all of Ukraine so I can switch your government. Yeah, but mate, you're on a desert island with a couple of bits of stick and a rock. You ain't going to do that. You know, you're in a position where you've got this amount of troops and you've got this amount of military equipment. You've been sanctioned left, right, and centre. Your hydrocarbons exports are going down a pan. The ruble's tanking, and the economy's screwed. And you got some people protesting over there, and you've got heat and energy issues over here. Like, can you achieve that? I don't think you can. But so he might have those general desires to fly to the moon. Again, it goes back to, yeah, but okay, like, pipe dreams aside, really, what are your goals here? Here's a key problem, says Jeffrey Michaels, is that this sort of scenario has been discussed for years, yet despite some ostensible Russian victory, whatever that may be defined as, the Kremlin doesn't seem too keen on coming to blows with the alliance. The discussion, so there is this deterrence still. That's what's holding them back. The discussion of 2 to 3 or 5 to 10 years rearmament is basically immaterial if the basic scenario is flawed. Why not attack tomorrow or in the next year and 11 months? Where are these figures coming from? What sort of Russian force levels are anticipated? Does this critique imply that there is no threat? It does not. Instead, I think the more important threat is overlooked precisely because of 1, assumption of Russian rationality, ends, ways, means, alignment, 2, focus on implied external objectives to near exclusion of internal ones. We typically assume military victory equals political victory. We typically ignore the possibility that military defeat equals political victory. In other words, one starts a war knowing one will lose militarily, but still gain politically. Not sure that can be for Putin. I've said that he's existentially connected to the outcome of this war, and I think if he loses in this war, he loses politically. But nonetheless, we also ignore the possibility that Russia might simply do something extremely stupid, such as blundering into some sort of war without any clear idea of what they are doing. I actually think that is what has happened. I think they blundered in with Plan A that was built on such bad intel, like Ukraine won't resist. Literally, that was it. Like, the whole issue of this war, and again, I've written about this, the whole issue of the war is that Putin had bad intel, and that's why the article I mentioned earlier in one of my videos earlier, which is, how is it I've got better intel than Putin? Like, how could I predict that the Ukraine would resist, but he couldn't? So he just had terrible intel, garbage in, garbage out. So he makes a decision to go to war, and recognizes that that's failed already, and has no plan B. If you had no plan B, then you are left blundering about, not knowing what you're doing, which is, such as blundering into some sort of war without any clear idea of what they're doing. No plan B. And then having to kind of work it out on the fly. Well, we just keep going on for as long as possible. Maybe America would get bored. Okay, let's do that then. Meanwhile, can you attack there so you can take Avdiivka and then I can go woohoo to my electorate? Is that all right? Yeah, okay. Oh, everyone's been killed. You want to try it again? Okay. Everyone's been killed. How about Sinkivka? All right. Oh, everyone's been killed. I guess there's Marinka. We've taken that, haven't we? Yeah. Bakhmut? Yeah. We just shout about that? Okay. NATO policy statements refer to defending every inch of alliance territory. I'm fairly certain a few hundred or a few thousand Russian troops could seize more than an inch if they put their minds to it, and they have that capability now, and they don't need to wait 2 years. Why do this? Why take the risk of seizing 1 inch, 1 mile, or 100 miles of NATO territory? Might irrational Russian objective simply be to score political points externally and internally? If so, what ways and means are needed? Do they need to seize or only raid territory? Alternatively, what might a stupid, ill thought through, poorly resourced attack look like? Might this not constitute a more plausible risk? Even if not, this is a type of scenario we simply ignore, but it would be good to think a bit more about it than we have hitherto. Yeah, I mean, I guess it raises just more questions than it answers, but yeah, what are Russia up to? What are they up to with regard to Ukraine? What are they up to with regard to NATO and the interactions with NATO? What is holding Russia back? I think it is NATO, but also NATO are being held back by potential escalation risk with Russia. And so you've got two things going on here. You've got the Ukraine war with Russia happening, and you've got how NATO reacts with Ukraine, but that is itself its own interaction with Russia over the heads of the Ukraine war. You've got this escalation worry with red lines and nuclear at the top. NATO Russia there, and underneath you've got Ukraine Russia. And Ukraine is saying, look, give us everything, do this, do that, and all the people up here are like, yeah, but what about this? What about that? And of course, yeah, every time we've met that red line, every time we've got to that red line, nothing actually happens, and that should be fed back into, okay, what's this say about Russia going forward in terms of how we act? If we look previously, and every time we've got to a red line, nothing happens, then does that give us more confidence to be quite proactive or more robust in our activity? You know, they are teaching us that actually they are a paper bear, Russians here. That went on a lot longer than I was expecting, so I'm going to leave it there. I've got all these tabs to go through, and I'm never going to do it, am I? So let's just go back to this one. Let's just end on this one. And this is a sidewalk interview with Russians who were asked, what if Ukraine wins? 90% have only one scenario: Russia will win. Ruski Mir, Russian world. At the same time, public opinion in Russia is not entirely static. Some of them openly dare to express their views. People in Russia will simply howl from hunger sooner or later, says one. So let's just see. We'll spend just a little bit of time looking at this guy, see what he says. It's just one opinion in Russia. Anecdote. You got someone having the gall to say stuff like this. We want to annex and liberate, but why is this necessary? Such a good question that more Russians should ask. Why do we need to annex? I need to talk a lot about the natural resources in the Donbass region. I've talked a lot about Sevastopol being a very important warm water deep sea port that gives Russia access to the Mediterranean and very much aids their influence operations in the Mediterranean and central part of the world, Suez Canal. Russia can access so much of the world through there. That's why Sevastopol has been important. But I've not really talked about the Donbass region and the natural resources that are there. I think right at the beginning of the war, I may have mentioned it in one of my articles, talking about the importance of that. But actually, I have neglected to mention that since then. Greg Terry did a video recently where he said, "Oh, Johnny would love this map that's on the wall, and it gives all the icons for the different natural resources around Ukraine." And like, damn right, I really should return to that. Anyway, look how our regions live. I wouldn't want to join Russia, he says, laughing, and correctly so. I mean, goodness me, we've seen what's been going on with freezing apartment blocks and the energy infrastructure in Russia. I'd rather join the Poles, who live like people. So here's a Russian who's giving you the truth, that they don't live like people. I really hope someone like this doesn't get visited by the FSB. Our dictator was able to rally all the advanced countries against us. Ouch. Calling Putin a dictator, rallying countries against him. That's exactly what's happened. I mean, this is as accurate as you'll get. Hitler and Napoleon also fought against coalitions and lost. He is comparing Putin with Hitler and Napoleon. I can't imagine the FSB are going to let this lie. But, you know, freedom looks like in Russia, right? They also have more resources, although in a democracy it is difficult to use them. Just what I was talking about earlier, in a sense, that impasse from democratic mechanisms you don't get in a democracy. But in an autocracy, it's easier because you're the king and you do what you want. I love it when I have all these tabs and they all actually like mix together in a sensible way, and it is just complete serendipity more often than not. Ultimately, we are worse off. We already have problems with the economy, he says. The Ukrainians are unlikely to win by force, rather turmoil within Russia is possible. Exactly why I was talking about how it was so important these protests in the east of Russia are taking place. Gives other people permission to protest, and it shows that all is not well, and you start spreading like a cancer throughout throughout the veins of Russia. People in Russia will simply howl from hunger sooner or later, he says. And wow, that's really strong rhetoric there, but it's on the money there. Really good stuff from that chap. I hope he get whisked away. Anyway, thank you so much for your support. Really appreciate all of you. You're such a wonderful community. Thank you very much to those who have been supporting in all the different ways with memberships. Thank you, members. Members are legends. Thank you for people using PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee and Super Thanks and all that kind of stuff. Honestly, I don't thank you enough.